You might know Dune from the movies, or the fact that it's one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time. But did you know about the 6 other books in the series? Well, I read every single one, so you don't have to, and let's just say, things get weird. Extremely weird. But before we get into the video, spoiler warning. I will be summarizing every single Dune book in pretty good detail, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I advise you click off of this video. So now that we got all that figured out, let's get into the first book, Dune. So in book 1, titled Dune, House Atreides takes over the planet of Arrakis, or better known as Dune. The main character of this book, Paul, learns that the spies from this planet actually gives him visions that can see into the future. In this whole universe, spice is very, very valuable. Literally, a briefcase of this spice could purchase an entire planet. Now, House Atreides is attacked by the power-hungry heretics. I think I'm... I can't say it. Anyways, these people want to defeat House Atreides and claim the planet Arrakis for the Emperor. Paul eventually becomes a religious leader to the local Fremen, the people of Dune. He falls in love with one of their people, Chani, and drinks the water of life, which lets him see the past, present, and future now. With the help of the Fremen, he defeats the and the Emperor is forced to back down and give the throne to Paul with his wish to marry his daughter. I gave the first book of the Dune series 5 stars because this book was just genuinely so epic. The writing didn't feel slow. It was actually really well paced, I feel like. I kind of like actually sped through the book. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed every single page. One of the main things I really loved about Dune is that I came into this thinking that the writing was going to be super outdated. This book was written in the 1960s, so I just had that assumption that, oh, the writing was written in the 1960s, therefore I might not be able to understand what the author is trying to say. But I was actually so surprised on how well I was able to understand Dune. It legitimately feels like something that could have been written today. And Frank Herbert's philosophical writing style leaves you with so many memorable quotes and like little pieces of wisdom that like genuinely just like blown away for a science fiction novel. And I feel like Dune should be read by every single reader, even if you don't finish the rest of the series. It's such a influential part of literature that I feel like everyone just needs to experience. Now Paul Atreides is ruling the planet of Dune. Nothing can possibly go wrong, right? Book 2, Dune Messiah, is set 15 years after the events of Dune. Paul Atreides' religious rule as Emperor of Dune has been a complete failure. In the time between the two books, a holy war has happened in the universe, leaving Paul pretty much powerless to control the deaths of his own people. Even though over 60 billion people have died, Paul's visions show him that that's actually very far from the war's outcome for humanity. During this war, Paul's dynasty has become extremely unstable. House Corrino, the Bene Gesserit, and the Spacing Guild plan to manipulate Paul into making a mistake by resurrecting his old mentor, Duncan, Idaho, in Agula to question Paul's actual impact on Arrakis. Now, Paul's visions allow him to foresee most of this manipulation, but that still leaves him with the consequences of his choices. When his lover Chani dies while giving birth to his twins, Leto II and Ghanima, Paul is just devastated. And then all of a sudden, Paul becomes blind due to an assassination attempt by the Tedeschi. The book ends with Paul disappearing into the desert, with everyone left assuming that he died. Now, this book was very, very interesting. I actually gave this book 3 stars. I remember it feeling very slow, and I was definitely missing most of the action that I felt happened in Dune. The main reason why I genuinely love Dune is that there are all these big action sequences, there are all these like fun little battle scenes, but that just all goes away in Dune Messiah. It's very much about the politics. This book was actually made just to essentially set up the next book in the series, Children of Dune. Now in hindsight, having read the entire series, this book does feel very essential to the whole plot. Without it, you would have a bunch of unanswered questions as to why Paul disappeared into the desert. That's a huge thing that happens in Children of Dune. Book 3, Children of Dune, is set 9 years after the events of Messiah. The story follows Paul's children, Ghanima and Leto II, who are now under the protection of Paul's sister, Alia. Ala. I'm just gonna call her Ala, okay. Except Ala starts to become unstable, and her mind gets possessed by the Baron Harkonnen. Who I'm not saying the name right. Oh my. Anyways, Ala starts to go insane, with basically her empire on the tip of chaos. Now, the twins also possess the ability to see the future like their father, and Leto foresees a golden path, a vision that ensures the survival and protection of humanity. But it requires a very personal sacrifice. To achieve this path, Leto has to make a fateful decision to merge himself with a sandworm. Doing this makes him practically invincible and secures him as the next godlike ruler. Now, during all of this, Paul actually returns to Arrakis, but in disguise as a preacher. Eventually, Leto and ghanima suspect this, and they have a conversation with Paul. During this conversation, Paul refuses to take back the Empire. He puts it in his children's hands and ensures Leto that the golden path is the right path for humanity. Paul eventually gets consumed by the sands of Arrakis, and Ala unalives herself because of the possession of her mind, which is actually just kind of tragic. But ultimately, she did not want to cause any more damage to the Empire of Arrakis. So I gave Children of Dune 4.2 stars. I thought it was so fun to see Paul return back to Arrakis in the form of this mysterious preacher character, but I couldn't help but feel like I wanted more of that in this book. I think it was still very interesting to learn about the two children, Leto and ghanima. Leto essentially acts like this very smart adult. Like, there's many quotes in this book that are like, oh, I wonder how it feels to be such a genius person, a genius, like, adult-like state in such a young body. Leto is like 12 years old in this book. And honestly, for this trilogy, I think that this is a perfect ending. It really sums up everything, and you don't have to continue on to the rest of the books, right? There's no reason to write any more books, right? Except he did. Book 4, God Emperor Dune, is set 3,500 years after the events of Children of Dune. Leto, who is a combined sandworm human god, is basically immortal and invulnerable to violence. With his foreseen golden plan, Arrakis has turned from a desert into this lush green biosphere. During this time, a long string of resurrected Duncan, Idaho Beulahs have served them, and the Fremen have been replaced by these fish speakers, an all-female army that serves Leto. God Emperor Dune mainly follows a rebellion against Leto, led by this young woman named Siona. Siona is part of a group that plans to overthrow him, and Leto actually sees this as a key part to his plan. Eventually, Leto dies, and his body gets torn apart, and sand trout, baby sandworms, come out of it, basically, okay? And this sand trout actually helps Arrakis slowly turn back to its desert state, reuniting the production of spice and sandworms. This acts as the climax of the Golden Path, leaving Siona and Duncan to manage his empire. Now, I gave God Emperor of Dune 4.5 stars. I'm not gonna lie, I was just so happy because the action was so back in this book. It took me a minute to try and like get up to speed with what was all happening. Genuinely, the time gaps between these books are so huge, like a lot has changed. For example, it took me a good 100 or so pages to find out that the fish speakers were actually like replacing the Fremen. I was like, what happened to the Fremen? I'm not gonna lie, in this entire series, this has to be my second favorite Dune book. Bro, I just think it's so weird. It's extremely weird, especially having a human sandworm god ruler. But at the end of the day, I think that's what makes this book just genuinely so fun. But guess what? After this book, we get into the second trilogy, which is where things kind of go downhill a little bit. And I'll explain why. Book 5, Heretics of Dune, is set 1,500 years after the events of God Emperor. Since then, the Empire has fallen into ruin. Humanity exploded into a period known as the Scattering, where people left Dune to different parts in space. Now these people are all of a sudden coming back, including the power-hungry honored Matres, which pose a huge threat to the galaxy. The Honored Matres are dangerous. They use extreme violence, intimidation, and sexual control to bend others at their will. The Bene Gesserit are central to the story, and the rest of the books follow their battle against the Honored Matres. Arrakis is now known as Rakis and has reverted back to its desert form. The Bene Gesserit learn of a young girl named Siona who can control the sandworms on Rakis. Because of this, the Bene Gesserit know that humanity will worship Siona, so they try and breed her with a newly resurrected Duncan Idaho Gila. There is way too many Duncan Idahos in this freaking series. Except this new Duncan is different. The Telexu, a sort of elf-like scientist species, basically have modified this Gila to have special reproductive powers. This new Duncan scares the Honored Matres, and the Bene Gesserit use this Duncan to lure the Honored Matres into exploding Arrakis, ending Leto's influence on the whole planet. The Bene Gesserit captures a sandworm and takes it to their new planet chapterhouse, where they use it to make spice. So I gave Heretics of Dune 3 stars. I found Heretics to be really just all over the place, very slow, very hard to process. Legitimately, the long time gaps between these books, just like, there's just new characters. Every single book, there's new things, there's new terms you just gotta like wrap your head around. I feel like every single reader that has gotten this far into the series knows that. It sort of just falls off after God Emperor, literally. Like, I find everything to just get way more confusing, way more complex. There's so many new variables introduced, especially with the Honored Matres. A lot of new planets. Arrakis gets exploded. That's huge. Like, Arrakis, literally the series this whole entire series is called Dune, and the planet Dune is exploded now, so that's perfect. Now here's the thing, even though I maybe did not enjoy it as much, Heretics was still a pretty decently written book. I feel like once I reread the series, maybe when I'm older, I will like Heretics of Dune better. I don't know. I just found it really, I guess, exhausting to take in all of the new information that we get in this book. But then after this, we get to the finale, the final book in the series, Chapterhouse Dune. The final Dune book, Chapterhouse, takes place right after the events of Heretics of Dune. This book follows the Bene Gesserit as they adjust to their new home planet Chapterhouse and how they turn it into a desert world for spice production. This is all led under Reverend Mother Odriad. Bro. Anyways, we learned that there might be more to the Honored Matres than we realized. We learned that the Honored Matres are actually fleeing from a very unknown, dangerous enemy in space, one that the Bene Gesserit and the Honored Matres will have to team up to defeat. But the aggression from the Honored Matres makes it really hard to form an alliance. Odriad resurrects a young Miles Teg, a soldier that died on Arrakis when it exploded, and trains Murbella, an ex-Honored Matre that kind of knows the ins and outs of how they work. So Murbella, kind of knowing the ins and outs of how they work, she infiltrates the Honored Matres, takes over, and merges an alliance between both the Honored Matres and the Bene Gesserit. During this, Duncan learns of these special powers that he has and decides to leave Chapterhouse. He literally flies off in a ship forever with Siona, a few other people, a sandworm, and a Vincent van Gogh painting, which is kind of funny. Literally, this book ends with them flying off into space with tons of questions unanswered. And Frank Herbert was supposed to write the epic conclusion to this entire series, but died before finishing it. So I gave Chapterhouse Dune 3 stars. Things just got way more confusing from here. I found it really hard to follow along, really hard to understand what was all going on. A lot of new characters, a lot of new places, especially with a whole new setting, Chapterhouse. Completely crazy. I'm just gonna say, the whole entire series just falls off right after God Emperor, okay? I feel like a lot of readers actually kind of recommend that you stop right at God Emperor of Dune. And having read the ending, even though it's very open-ended, leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions, I still feel like that's very fitting for some reason. And what's even more fitting is this scene that was at the end of Chapterhouse. So there's this scene with this elderly couple named Daniel and Marty. Some readers have theorized that this couple was actually supposed to represent the author Frank Herbert and his wife. In this scene, the couple sees the ship with Duncan in them flying away, and they talk about how the characters almost got away from them, almost as if they're talking about them writing this book and them being in control of the entire story. They discuss how there's no ending, how the characters are now free in space, forever. And this ending kind of cracks open the real, message behind Dune. These characters are now free from any power, any higher ups, any controlling dominance. So that's the ending to Dune, right? Well, you're wrong! You see, after Frank Herbert passed, his son, Brian Herbert, actually discovered the notes and the outline for the epic conclusion to the Dune series. He ended up writing this conclusion into 2 books using the notes and outline. This duology, Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune, is known as part of the expanded Dune series. After that, Brian went on to write way more Dune books. He wrote the Dune Prequel trilogy, the Legends of Dune trilogy, the Heroes of Dune trilogy, the Schools of Dune trilogy, and the Caladan trilogy. He's still writing these books today. These books, using notes and outlines from his father, are meant to fill in the gaps between the series. They're meant to kind of showcase what happens before the first book and what happens after. Now, the reception to these books is extremely mixed. Some say that they like the conclusion to the Dune series, but some say that they think it's a little bit inconsistent. Some say to stop at chapterhouse. Some say to read the epic conclusion that Brian Herbert wrote. And some say to just stop at the end of the first book and not even indulge yourself in the rest of the series. I say, do what you want. The main message Frank Herbert was trying to push behind all these books is that having too much power or having too much control over so many people could just end up with utter chaos. I really enjoyed this series, and here, I'll just say this, okay, 1,000 likes, and I'll read all of the books that Brian Herbert wrote, all of the expanded Dune series, and let you know what I actually think about it. Because to be fair, I haven't read that series. I'm not an expert in the expanded Dune series, so 1,000 likes, I'll read it. Now I know why the director of Dune is only making 3 films. Oh my goodness.